First, a little introduction. I have to apologize for those of you who have watched the London lecture, who have, maybe were in Austin and now you're going to have to hear this again. But a little introduction has to come first. There's many of you here that really don't know who I am and what my background is. But I'm a physicist, majored in physics and math, went to grad school, did my research there in experimental nuclear physics, went to work for the government, technical intelligence. After that, worked there a couple of decades, well, actually a little more than a decade, and then went to Huntsville, Alabama to work in missile defense. So I've, my background has been doing simulations, sensor systems, mathematical models, software engineering, program management, systems engineering, those sorts of things is what I've done. Now I work for NASA. Okay, and what I do for NASA falls under the heading of risk analysis. Basically, it's mathematically modeling, doing physics models is what they call them, of the Ares 1, which is the shuttle replacement. And we do those models to find out how those systems react and interact, all the subsystems, with an idea of not having the mission fail or having the astronauts die in the process. So basically it's a safety and mission assurance kind of function. So it's a mathematical modeling of potential problems and see how those problems might affect the system. So that's what I do. I'm not full-time any longer. That's good news. Hopefully I'm going to be retired. I've retired twice already, so I need to retire the third time. I hope it sticks. I have a lot to do other than work at NASA. Okay, so how did somebody with a resume like what I've just shown you, end up writing books about consciousness? That doesn't seem to be a fit. But actually it turned out to be a very good fit. When I had just got out of graduate school and in my first job, I got introduced to Bob Monroe. I don't know if you all know Bob Monroe. Bob Monroe wrote 3 books. The first was Journeys Out of the Body. The second was Ultimate Journeys. Far Journeys, yeah, and then the Ultimate Journey, I think. And if you've read the second one, Far Journeys, you notice there was a TC physicist, and that was me. And when I met Bob, he had just finished building a building that was going to be the lab, and it wasn't. His organization wasn't called TMI then, and there really was no Monroe Institute. This was before all of that. Bob Monroe had had out-of-body experiences spontaneously. It wasn't something that he wanted to do. Matter of fact, in the beginning, it was something he dearly wanted not to do. He thought he was going crazy. He thought it was insane. He sought some psychiatric and psychological help. Charles Tart, I think, was the psychologist that he talked with. And eventually, through experimentation, he realized that it was real, that these were real experiences that he was having, and that he wasn't crazy. And about that time, he decided, well, if this is real, then there needs to be science, there needs to be something that can describe it. We need to be able to teach it to others. Is it just me? Am I just a unique freak and that it happened to me? Or can other people do this? And how can we make this kind of real to the larger population? How can we make this acceptable and scientific? I think at a deep level, Bob just didn't want to be the weird old guy that had funny experiences. He wanted to have legitimacy. And he wanted to have legitimacy not just among the counterculture that thought it was great, but in the world in general. He thought that was an important thing to achieve. And it was an important thing to achieve. These ideas need to spread through the main culture, not just in the counterculture. So he had just built this structure. He didn't have anything more than the shell up of the building. And myself and Dennis Menerick, Dennis was a double E electrical engineer, And Bob said, well, I'm looking for some scientific talent to help me run this lab, to put instruments in it, to come up with protocols, to make sure that it's credible so that we can publish papers and make this a respectable endeavor. So Dennis and I, of course, we jumped at the opportunity. We said, great, we'll do that, and we'll do that for free, and we'll put in as much time as necessary, but here's our deal. We want you to teach us what you know. So he agreed to that, and the reason we made that condition was because if you don't experience it, then you don't understand it. You can read about it, you can have somebody else tell you about it, you can read Bob's books, or you can talk to Bob or anybody else who does it, and that will produce a certain intellectual sense of what's possible, but it won't produce any knowing that it's real. The only way you get the knowing that it's real is through your own firsthand experience. You have to go there and do that. Otherwise, it's just an idea, something that sounds kind of neat and maybe exciting, but still just an intellectual idea. So Bob took us up on it. I think he personally would have rather had some older. We were both in our 20s. I was about 26, maybe 27, something like that. He would have rather had some established scientists with some credibility to their name, but he couldn't get any of those because they were all too concerned about their career. We were both young and had no concerns about our career at that point. So we thought it would be fun, and we're very, very anxious to get started. So for the next 5 years, I and Dennis went out to Whistlefield Farm, which was Bob's estate. Bob was a wealthy country gentleman. He owned a cable company. He owned some big apartments and was well-to-do, had horses running in the field by his house, all the usual Virginia country gentleman accoutrements. So he had built this lab. He had built special booths in it that were soundproof. He built all the booths were electromagnetically shielded. That's because he didn't know exactly what would affect what. So he wanted to eliminate as many variables as possible. So it was a very interesting place. And Dennis and I would get in these booths, and we would come out almost every evening, at least 3 nights a week, and sometimes 5 nights a week. And then we'd come out on weekends. We'd get there about 7 o'clock at night after dinner, and we'd stay until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And we'd do that, week in and week out for about 5 years. And we'd also come out often with our families on the weekends. Now, involving your family in this is important, because if you take this path will change you. You will grow. You will change kind of who you are and how you relate to the world. Your reality will expand. And if your family, your loved ones, your significant others aren't involved too, then you're going to be growing in a way that they're not. So if you can, I encourage all of you to get your significant others involved in it as well, so that you grow together. It's not a necessary thing. It depends on how much freedom you and your significant others give each other, but it's a good thing to do, to try to work this area together. So we would bring our families out and put them in the booths too, so that they could experience what we were experiencing. And I think that's a good thing to do. So after about 5 years of this, it turned out to be very successful. Dennis and I discovered what's now called Hemi-Sync, which is basically binaural beats. It was a phenomena that Dennis read about in Scientific American. The binaural beat is you put one tone, a pure tone, which is a frequency, in one ear, another tone, you have to have headphones on, in the other ear that's just slightly different. And then each tone goes into each hemisphere of the brain, and at the corpus callosum, which is the center it's that membrane between the 2 hemispheres, the 2 tones actually meet and then get a beat frequency between them. So it actually causes, from the center of the brain out, a beat frequency. A beat frequency just means an oscillation that happens in the sound tone. So it's, that's a beat, a tone that goes up and down. And you get that toward the center of your brain. What it does is synchronizes the two hemispheres. So your right and your left hemisphere are now kind of in sync with each other. And because when Bob went out of body, he experienced a pulsation state at about 4 hertz. That's 4 cycles per second. And we thought that if we could stimulate that, perhaps that might, lead us someplace that we could reproduce these states. And we were just grabbing at straws. We didn't have any idea what we were going to do or how we were going to do it, but we were trying everything. And this worked. I mean, we tried a lot of crazy things. We set up a great giant capacitor on either side of our head, well, on my head anyway. I was the guinea pig on this one. And, we put about, 200,000 volts across that capacitor. And then we set it at a 4 hertz oscillation and see what happened. At that time, we were going to oscillate the pineal gland because we had read in some other book that was maybe involved in it. So we were going to shake that pineal gland at 4 hertz and see what happened. So we did everything we could think of. I can tell you what happened there. I had a headache for about 3 weeks. But no great insight, just that it was not a good thing to do. That was the only insight that came out of that. Okay, so that's kind of what it was like, and we were just experimenting, trying things. We found the binaural beats. It worked. It obviously did a kind of a brainwave entrainment. We had EEG on at the time, so we were looking at brainwave measurements, and we could see that suddenly the brainwaves, which generally will produce all sorts of frequencies across, they have Greek letter names, but alpha is like the 14 hertz and up, or 10 to 14, and then beta's up above that, and then the theta states is where that 4 hertz is in that theta state, and then the delta's below that is where you're unconscious. So we noticed that suddenly the brain waves from the EEG suddenly went to theta state. So the 4 hertz was driving the EEG, and it seemed to work very well. So that's kind of the origin of Hemi-Sync, and it got named Hemi-Sync later because we found with other equipment that would actually show us the two hemispheres. We had more sophisticated things than just the EEG could show that they were synced up, and that's how the name came around. So anyway, Bob, in about 3 or 4 years, I guess, had us going out of body just as he did. We were able to leave our bodies whenever we wanted to. We'd go explore. Everything had to be evidential. That was the whole point. Just doing it is like an experience, and it's fun, but it doesn't account for anything if you can't tell that it's real. You have to know whether, am I making this up or is it real? That's a big question, and you have to answer that question. The only way you can answer that question is by evidential experiment. You have to experiment. And everyone has to do their own experiments. The way you experiment is to find things that you can check on. You need to make you need to explore the non-physical, physical interface. You can do things like practice healing. You can do things like reading numbers on a blackboard in another room, just any sort of thing that you can think of to convince yourself that what you're doing is real and not something that you're making up. An essential ingredient. I can't stress that enough. So we did that, and evidential was, everything we did was focused on evidential. And the thing that finally convinced Dennis and I both that it was real was that we took a trip together. Dennis and I met above the lab, and then we went off on an adventure in the non-physical while our bodies were laying in these isolation chambers. And Bob had a microphone suspended above our mouths. That's the way we operated, so that he would kind of guide us, and we would tell him what it is we were seeing and what we were experiencing and that sort of thing. And he'd ask us questions, and he would lead us through things to collect evidence. So this particular experiment, we were to go on a trip together, and we did, and it took about 2 hours, and we came back, and you'd have to know Bob Monroe. He had a very sardonic, kind of dry wit, and he looked at us and kind of gave us this wry smile and says, "Well, do you guys really think we're together?" And twinkle in his eye, like he always had. And we kind of looked at each other and said, "Well, we think so, we had talked a little bit coming back and back down the hallway, and we had decided that we had all had, very evidential, very specific things. If you just went up and floated in the void, well, that wouldn't be there wouldn't be much data there to compare. But we had had a very interesting adventure. So Bob put on both the tapes, playing the audio back from us, and he flipped them both on at the same time. And here were these two independent tapes from two independent people who could not hear or sense each other in any way. And here we were having conversations back and forth on these tapes, answering each other's questions, seeing the same things, and both of us just were kind of floored. I mean, we had been doing this for some years, and we had convinced ourselves intellectually that it was real because we had data, statistics saying that the data we were getting was, like 1 in 100,000, that it could have been by chance. So that we had the statistics that was verifying that things that we were doing that were evidential, indeed what we were doing was real. But verifying it intellectually or even getting the statistics, even though we were both kind of scientists and technical people, you still don't believe it, even if the numbers say it's true, until something happens to you that you just cannot, explain any other way. So that was kind of the big one for me, and I think everybody has to go through that to a point where they have some experience that leaves them with no doubt that what they're doing is real. So that's basically how I got to where I am. Okay, now everything that's in my books is firsthand experience. These are not books that, I'm not a real widely read person. These aren't books that I've gone around and I've read a lot of the literature and then I've done a synthesis and brought it all together, so that I kind of then put my own twist on it and explain it from my own point of view. Everything that's here is basically my experience. It's all firsthand. Okay, a couple of comments. Because of my background, starting with Bob Monroe, I kind of get seen as kind of the out-of-body guy, and that's really unfortunate because it's not about out-of-body. Out-of-body is just a phenomena, So one of the metaphors that I use about out-of-body is if you were in your house, if you were in a house, no windows, and perhaps a door that was locked and you couldn't go through, and you just lived there until you were an adult, never been outside, never seen outside, your whole reality was just your house. Now that's an analogy to this physical matter reality being your house. And then one day, you found a door or you found a way to open the door and you walked out into your backyard and you looked around and it's like, wow, there's sky, there's distance, there's space, dogs barking, people mowing their grass next door, all these things that you didn't know existed. That would be like going out of body, but it's just your backyard. Now, yes, it is, that backyard's attached to all the rest of the world, right? So that's a place where you could go explore, but most people do not. Most people just hang out in the backyard in amazement, and that's about as far as they go with it. And part of that reason is that they have read things about out-of-body. They've read about the larger reality frame. They have these concepts of what it's like, and they have a hard time getting beyond those concepts. In other words, there's a trap where you are limited by what you think you know. Now, how do you get beyond what you think you know? How do you get beyond what you expect? It's a very hard thing to do, and it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of very intentional exploration. The problem is that you interpret what you experience. Okay, when we go out into that out-of-body state and we say, oh, I saw this and I saw that, well, you're not really seeing anything. You don't have eyes. It's not your non-physical eyes. Well, people say, oh, it's your mind's eye, but that's just a metaphor. Okay, you're getting experience, and then you're interpreting that experience, and you're interpreting it in terms of visual pictures or in terms of sound or something else. Okay, so it's not as straightforward as you think. Your interpretation is based on your experience and what you know. So if your experience is limited and you believe what you read in the book, then that's basically what you're going to find. You're going to interpret things. And even when you get something new, you're going to tend to interpret it in terms of what you know. So it's not a simple thing to explore, and it does take a lot of patience and time to do that. So out of body is just a door. It's not the thing to do. You know, I'm not an out of body salesman. That's not where it's at. Okay. Now, the other thing that's a little unfortunate about the term out of body is just, that was a term actually that Bob coined. He coined out of body because before then it was the astral travel, and it was other sorts of things, and they tended to be related to certain philosophies, and he didn't want to be bounded by any of that, so he made up his own term so that it would carry no baggage. There was no preconceived notions with it. But the last word in out of body is body, and that's a problem because people feel that it starts with getting out of their body. You don't have to get out of your body. You know, there's thousands of people who lie there in bed trying to go out of body, going like this. You know, they're trying to roll out because Bob said he rolled out of body. And then he said he sat up, and they're trying to sit up, and it's about their body, you know, and somehow they've got to get free of this body, but that's a trap in itself. You know, you have mind, you have consciousness, and your consciousness, your mind, is already out of your body. You don't need to get it out of your body. It's already out of your body. All you have to do is set it free, and you set it free by taking away the constraints that you've placed on it. So it's not about learning technique. It's learning about how to stop blocking what you do. Your mind's already out of your body. All you have to do is set it free and be able to experience with it. I am very likely to stomp on some of your favorite beliefs. I am very likely to break some of your paradigms. And the point is not for me to just break up a paradigm and walk over your belief and then send you home with a broken belief. You know, that's not a good idea. The idea is basically that you will maybe see a possibility of another way to approach things, okay, another possibility. Now, we don't want to go to belief. If I don't want you to believe what I tell you. Please don't believe what I tell you. It's a funny thing to say, but don't believe a word I say. Yeah, that's true. I want you just to consider the possibilities. Then I want you to apply open-minded skepticism. That's the key, open-minded skepticism. You must be skeptical, okay? You have to find your own personal big picture. When you find that big picture, in other words, I'd like you to take the new information that I will bring to you, and then I want you to sort that with what you already know and come up with something that fits you as an individual. You can't have my experience. You have to have your own experience. So it has to fit you. But remain open all the time. It's the bigger picture that you want. And ask questions. Because if I break some of your favorite beliefs or paradigms, you're going to be a little lost for a bit. And how does that connect with what you had before? Ask questions. So if you don't have time at the end of these, ask them, write them down. Don't forget about them. Write those questions down, and we'll get to them at the end. At the very end, we'll have a couple of hours to just talk. So that's how you're going to help to get whole again. If I break any of your beliefs, is ask the questions and see if you can't match up where you were with what you see now and come up with a new whole that you own. Don't try to just see my point of view. It has to be your own point of view. Okay, that's one thing. Second, a warning about words. Okay, words are tricky little devils, and you need to understand that they mean different things to different people, so that when I say these words, you're going to hear something different than what I intend. You can't help that. You know, that's just the way it is with words. For instance, A very good question was brought up last night about talking about levels of evolution. You say, well, we are evolving our spirit, our soul, and we have, you know, so-and-so, they're more evolved, they've evolved to this level, and so, well, don't take those levels as I'm better than you are, you know, you're better than somebody else. It's not like I'm evolved and other people aren't. Good for me, you know. That's a very dysfunctional way of looking at it. Yes, there are differences, but just look at them as differences. You should have a respect, even bordering on reverence, for everything, for everybody, every critter, you know, every plant and rock. You know, this existence that we're in deserves your respect. You should not feel superior to anything. You're just different. So you can relish your differences, but don't turn those differences into ego. The second thing, well, when you before I leave that, when you interact with people, and you know that some people just aren't getting it, they're mean-spirited, they're all about themselves, they're very greedy and this sort of thing. Well, how do you view those people? The way you should view those people, not as inferior beings, but as people who are doing the best they can with what they got. Okay, everybody comes in with a little different thing. We're all at different parts, in different places in this evolutionary process, and they're just